In a service elevator, one split-second decision. Using a cleaning cart to shield an old man from danger. Traps a young cleaner in the hidden world of a Korean crime dynasty, where the untouchable Mafia boss has never felt anything, until now. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. You're about to hear a story that reminds us why love, patience, and hope still matter. Before we begin, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share the story with someone who needs hope today. Your support helps these stories reach hearts that truly need them. Drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. And now, let's go straight into the story. Zariah Noel arrives at the luxury hotel for another shift, armed with nothing but her cleaning cart, a teddy bear backpack, and the hope of one day paying off her father's debts. But fate has a darker plan. After throwing herself between an elderly stranger and a would-be assassin in a service elevator, she unknowingly saves the life of the most dangerous man's grandfather, and catches the icy attention of Pai Young, the ruthless Mafia boss who has never liked anyone, let alone loved. What begins as a forced promotion to personal security assistant quickly spirals into power plays, deadly jealousy, contract marriages neither remember signing, and a world where tattoos hide secrets and love is the most dangerous weapon of all. Between Kenji's sabotage, Elena's vendetta, and a marriage certificate that could destroy the syndicate, Zariah must fight to survive in a gilded cage where loyalty is bought in blood, and one cleaner's courage might be the only thing that can melt a frozen heart. The mahogany doors of Pai Young's private office slammed open with enough force to rattle the ink paintings on the wall. Zariah stumbled through them, still clutching her cleaning cart like a shield, her teddy bear backpack bouncing against her spine as two stone-faced bodyguards shoved her forward into the coldest room she'd ever entered. It wasn't the temperature. It was him. Pai Young sat behind a desk that looked carved from a single piece of black marble. His sharp suit so precisely tailored it might as well have been armor. Dark tattoos crept up from his collar like smoke, disappearing beneath expensive fabric, and his eyes, cold, calculating, utterly devoid of warmth, tracked her every movement as if she were a problem he was deciding how to eliminate. Behind him, floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Seoul skyline like he owned it. Knowing what she'd learned in the last 20 minutes, he probably did. "Grandfather," Pai Young said, his voice smooth and deadly as a blade sliding from its sheath. "This is unnecessary." The elderly man Zariah had saved, the one who'd smiled so kindly in the elevator, now sat in a leather chair to the side, looking far less frail than he had 30 minutes ago. In fact, he looked downright dangerous, despite the expensive hanbok and the way he sipped his tea like they were discussing the weather instead of her fate. "You think so?" Grandfather's tone was pleasant. Zariah had already learned that pleasant was more terrifying than angry in this world. "The girl threw herself in front of a knife for me. That kind of stupid bravery is rare." Stupid is the operative word. "I prefer loyal." Grandfather set down his cup with a delicate clink. "You will hire her as your personal security assistant." The temperature in the room dropped another 10 degrees. Pai Young's fingers, adorned with rings that looked more like weapons than jewelry, drummed once against the marble. "I have 12 trained bodyguards." And none of them noticed the assassin in the service elevator. Grandfather's smile didn't reach his eyes. She did. With a mop. Zariah opened her mouth to explain that it was actually the cart, not the mop, then wisely shut it again when Pai Young's gaze cut to her like a laser. "She's a cleaner," Pai Young said, as if she weren't standing right there. "She knows nothing about security, protocol, or how to survive in our world for longer than a week." "Then you'll teach her." "I don't have time to babysit." "You'll make time." Grandfather stood, and despite his age, everyone in the room felt the shift in power. Even Pai Young's jaw tightened. "She saved my life, Pai Young. That means she's under our protection now. And since someone in this organization clearly wants me dead, I'd rather have someone close to you who doesn't know enough to betray us yet." The logic was twisted, but Zariah could see it working across Pai Young's face. The calculations, the cold cost-benefit analysis of keeping her alive versus making her disappear. She should have been terrified. She was terrified. But she was also thinking about her father's debts, about her siblings' school fees, about the fact that personal security assistant probably paid better than minimum wage and came with fewer bleach fumes. How much? The words escaped before she could stop them. Both men turned to stare at her. The salary, Zariah clarified, gripping her cart tighter. How much does a personal security assistant make? For the first time, something flickered across Pai Young's face. Not quite amusement. More like a predator noticing its prey had teeth. More than you'd make in 5 years of scrubbing toilets, grandfather said warmly. Plus benefits. Housing. Protection. I'll take it. You'll regret it, Pai Young said flatly, standing from his desk. He was taller than she'd realized, and the tattoos on his neck seemed to writhe in the dim light. Report here tomorrow at 6 a.m. Wear something that won't get you killed. He dismissed her with a gesture, already turning back to his windows, to his empire, to whatever dark business required a man to wear death on his skin. Zariah was halfway to the door, heart hammering, when his voice stopped her cold. And lose the teddy bears. She glanced down at her beloved backpack, at the plush faces that had comforted her through every hard day, and felt something stubborn flare in her chest. No. The silence that followed could have shattered glass. But grandfather's quiet laugh broke it first, and Zariah fled before the Mafia boss could decide whether her courage was brave or just another kind of stupid. Zariah arrived at 5:45 a.m., which turned out to be a mistake because Pai Young was already there, watching the sunrise over Seoul like he was plotting which parts of it to burn down first. You're early, he said without turning around. Somehow he'd known the exact moment she'd step through the door, even though her new shoes, practical flats, since heels seemed like a death sentence in a building full of armed men, had been completely silent on the marble floor. I thought that was a good thing? It is. If you're competent. He finally turned, and the morning light did nothing to soften him. If anything, it made him look more dangerous, highlighting the sharp angles of his face and the intricate tattoos that disappeared beneath his charcoal suit. We'll see. The office looked different in the early morning. Less like a throne room, more like a war room. Papers covered the desk in neat stacks, each one probably worth more than her life. Or documenting the end of someone else's. Pai Young gestured to a smaller desk that had materialized overnight in the corner. Your station. You'll screen my appointments, manage security rotations, and most importantly, he moved closer, and Zariah forced herself not to step back. You'll learn to recognize threats before they reach this floor. Tell me what's wrong with this room right now. Zariah blinked. Wrong. Threats. Vulnerabilities. Things that could kill me. His tone suggested this was a perfectly normal morning quiz. She scanned the office, heart racing. The windows. No, probably bulletproof. The door. Guarded. The desk. Solid enough to hide behind. Her eyes landed on a decorative vase near the bookshelf, then the letter opener on his desk, then. The tea service, she said slowly. No one's checked it yet. And that abstract painting is hung at the perfect height to hide a camera. Also, I have no idea who you're meeting today, which means I can't screen anyone, which means I'm useless. Something almost like approval flickered across his face. Almost. Better than I expected. Still terrible. He moved to his desk, rolling up his sleeves with deliberate precision. The tattoos were even more intricate than she'd realized. Dragons and tigers and symbols she didn't recognize, all rendered in black ink that seemed to absorb light. These tell a story. Every mark is earned. In my world, your skin is your resume. He was trying to scare her. Zariah recognized the tactic because her younger brother did the same thing with horror movies, watching her face to see when she'd flinch. She didn't flinch. That's a lot of accomplishments, she said diplomatically, pulling out her own bag, a slightly more professional tote, though the teddy bear backpack sat defiantly at her feet. Must have hurt. Pain is information. So is kindness. She wasn't sure where the words came from, but they were out now, hanging in the air between them like a challenge. Pai Young's eyes narrowed. You think I need kindness lessons from a cleaner? I think this office has bad vibes, Zariah said, surprised by her own boldness. Maybe it was the early hour, or the way he kept trying to intimidate her and it kept not quite working, or the fact that she'd already survived an assassination attempt in an elevator, so what was a little corporate tension? Everything sharp and cold, and she pulled out a small teddy bear keychain from her bag, the same style as her backpack bears but tiny, and before she could second guess herself, She walked over and placed it on the corner of his pristine desk. Missing something soft. The silence that followed was atomic. Pai Young stared at the tiny plush bear like it was a live grenade. Its cheerful button eyes gleamed in the morning light, completely out of place among the stark black and chrome and deadly sharp edges. Remove it. No. That's an order. You hired me for my judgment, right? My ability to notice things others miss. Zariah met his gaze, refusing to look away even though every survival instinct screamed at her to back down. I'm noticing that everyone who works for you is terrified. Fear makes people sloppy. Sloppy gets people killed. Maybe if you had one thing in here that wasn't designed to intimidate, your people would think clearly enough to actually protect you. For a long, terrible moment, Pai Young just stared at her. Then at the bear. Then back at her. His hand moved so fast she almost missed it. But he didn't grab the bear. He grabbed a file from his desk and dropped it in front of her. Today's schedule. Memorize it. If anyone not on this list gets within 10 feet of me, you'll wish you were back scrubbing toilets. He stalked toward the door, clearly done with the conversation, but paused at the threshold. The bear stays. For now. If it compromises security, it burns. The door closed behind him with a decisive click, leaving Zariah alone with the sunrise, a schedule full of dangerous names, and one tiny teddy bear sitting triumphant on a Mafia boss's desk. Wait up. Have you subscribed? Do that now before do it. Let's go. The envelope arrived during their third argument of the day, which was impressive considering it was only 10:30 a.m. You can't just reorganize my security rotations because you have a feeling, Pai Young said, not bothering to look up from the contract he was redlining with violent slashes of his pen. Your 2 p.m. meeting is with someone whose assistant called 3 times to confirm, Zariah countered, holding up her phone. Normal people confirm once. Paranoid people confirm twice. 3 times means they're either planning something or covering for someone who is. Or they're thorough. Or they're a threat. Pai Young finally looked up, and Zariah felt the weight of his stare like a physical thing. 2 weeks into this job and she still hadn't figured out if he was impressed by her instincts or annoyed that she kept being right. The knock on the door interrupted what would have been argument point number 7. One of the building's administrative assistants entered, looking terrified, holding 2 envelopes like they might explode. Legal correspondence, she squeaked, placing one on Pai Young's desk and one on Zariah's before fleeing. Zariah frowned at the return address. A law firm she'd never heard of, expensive-looking letterhead. Her name spelled correctly, which was rare enough to be suspicious. Don't open that here, Pai Young said sharply. Why not? Because legal mail in this building is usually a death threat with better grammar. But he was already slicing open his own envelope with the letter opener she'd identified as a potential weapon on her first day. Fine. If he could open his, she could open hers. The word swam in front of her eyes for a moment before crystallizing into something impossible. Regarding your marriage to a name redacted. Under proxy marriage contract 2847K, entered into effect 3 years ago per your late father's estate settlement agreement. What? Zariah said aloud, her voice strangled. What? Quiet. I'm reading. Pai Young's jaw had gone tight, his knuckles white around the paper. I'm apparently married, Zariah continued, her volume rising because what else was she supposed to do? To someone. A ghost husband. A proxy. What does that even mean? My father married me off to some stranger to settle a debt and nobody told me. I said quiet. I'm married. To a person I've never met. The lawyer says it's been 3 years. 3 years I've been legally bound to some. She scanned the letter frantically, but the name was redacted everywhere, blacked out like a state secret. Who does this? Who enters someone into a marriage contract without telling them? People who need leverage, Pai Young bit out, still reading his own letter with an expression that could strip paint. People who trade in favors and blood debts. Welcome to how the world actually works. This is insane. I have to call this lawyer. I have to. You have to calm down and think strategically. He finally set down his letter, but his fingers were drumming that dangerous rhythm against the desk. A proxy marriage means someone needed a legal connection for inheritance or property rights. Your father's debts, were they to a specific family? An organization? I don't know. He never told me anything before she stopped, throat tight. The lawyer's letter says I need to confirm receipt and acknowledge the marriage or file for dissolution, but there's a clause about financial penalties. Don't sign anything. Pai Young's voice cut through her spiral like a knife. Don't acknowledge, don't file, don't contact them until we know what this is really about. You work for me now. Your legal entanglements are my security concern. But there was something else in his expression, something she couldn't quite read. What firm sent this? She checked the letterhead. Jung and Associates. His eyes narrowed. Same as mine. They stared at each other across the desk, the morning light cutting between them. 2 letters with 2 redacted names and one impossible coincidence hanging in the air. Let me see your letter, Zariah said. No. Let me see it, or I'll assume you're hiding something. I'm always hiding something. It's called survival. But he slid the letter across the desk anyway, just as she slid hers toward him. They read in silence, neither one looking at the other, both too focused on the words that kept not appearing. The blacked-out names, the redacted details, the carefully worded legalese that said everything and nothing. Mystery wife, Pai Young muttered, disgusted. Married 3 years ago as part of grandfather's estate planning. Never met. Never notified. Mystery husband, Zariah echoed, something cold settling in her stomach. Same timeline. Same type of contract. They both looked up at the exact same moment, realization dawning, but before either could speak, Pai Young's phone erupted with an emergency alert. 3 sharp tones that made every bodyguard in the building reach for their weapons. The letter slipped from Zariah's hands, forgotten, as Pai Young was already moving toward the door. All business, the mystery of their ghost spouses shoved aside for whatever crisis demanded his immediate attention. Stay here, he ordered. Touch nothing. Read nothing else. And for God's sake, don't call that lawyer. Then he was gone, and Zariah was alone with 2 letters, 2 redacted names, and the creeping, impossible suspicion that the universe had a truly twisted sense of humor. The gala was everything Zariah had imagined wealth would look like and simultaneously nothing like it at all. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto marble floors so polished they looked like black mirrors. Women draped in silk and diamonds moved through the ballroom like exotic birds, their laughter sharp and practiced. Men in tuxedos that cost more than her childhood home spoke in low tones about deals that would reshape countries. And Zariah, wearing a borrowed dress that Pai Young's assistant had delivered with the terse note, "Blend in or stay home," felt like an imposter at her own execution. "You're doing fine," Pai Young murmured beside her, his hand resting with proprietary casualness at the small of her back. It was for show, she knew. Everything tonight was for show. But his touch burned through the silk like a brand. I don't belong here. No one belongs here. That's the secret. His eyes scanned the crowd with predatory precision. They're all pretending just as much as you are. Across the ballroom, Kenji watched them with eyes like a snake measuring strike distance. Pai Young's half-brother and chief rival within the syndicate, Kenji had made his feelings about Zariah's presence abundantly clear over the past month. She was a liability, a distraction, a cleaner playing dress-up in a world that would chew her up and spit her out. He wasn't wrong. But he also wasn't going to be proven right if Zariah had anything to say about it. Smile, Pai Young said softly. Kenji's moving. She managed to get her lips into something approximating pleasant before Kenji materialized beside them, champagne in hand and venom in his smile. Brother. And the assistant. The pause before her title was deliberate. Lovely event. Though I notice security seems somewhat distracted tonight. Security is exactly where it needs to be, Pai Young replied, his tone smooth as poisoned honey. Speaking of security, Kenji's gaze dropped to Zariah's bare neck, then widened with theatrical shock. Isn't that grandmother's emerald necklace? The words cut through nearby conversations like a gunshot. Heads turned. Whispers ignited. Zariah's hand flew to her throat, but there was nothing there. No necklace. No jewelry at all except the simple pearl earrings she'd worn from home. I'm not wearing. Not now, Kenji interrupted smoothly, pulling out his phone. But security footage from the coat room shows you were. 20 minutes ago. He turned the screen toward the growing crowd, and Zariah's stomach dropped. It was her. Or someone who looked exactly like her, wearing her borrowed dress, lifting an emerald necklace from a jewelry case in the private coat room reserved for the syndicate's most elite guests. That's not me, Zariah said, but her voice sounded weak even to her own ears. The footage disagrees. Kenji's smile was a blade. Grandmother's necklace. Priceless. Irreplaceable. And now missing from the case, which conveniently only you had access to when you freshened up earlier. The crowd was closing in now, hungry for scandal, for blood, for the spectacle of watching someone fall from grace they'd never actually possessed. I would never. Search her, someone murmured. Call the police, another voice added. In our world, we handle theft internally, Kenji said, and there was nothing playful in his expression now. The punishment for stealing from the family is... Enough. Pai Young's voice didn't rise in volume, but every person in the ballroom went silent. He stepped forward, placing himself between Zariah and Kenji with the kind of movement that made trained killers reach for weapons they weren't carrying. You accuse my assistant of theft, Pai Young said quietly, and the quiet was worse than shouting. You show doctored footage. Yes, doctored, I can see the timestamp splice from here. And you expect me to what? Hand her over. Let you humiliate her to undermine me. The footage is authentic. The footage is edited. Badly. Pai Young pulled out his own phone, fingers moving with swift precision. Zariah was with me in the East Wing 20 minutes ago. Security cameras, multiple witnesses, including 3 board members. She was never near the coat room. He turned the screen to show crystal-clear footage of himself and Zariah in conversation near the gardens. Timestamp matching exactly when the supposed theft occurred. Kenji's smile faltered. The necklace, Pai Young continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom, is in my personal safe, where I placed it this morning, because grandmother asked me to keep it secure during the event. Would you like to call her and confirm, or shall I? The color drained from Kenji's face. As for my assistant, Pai Young turned, and for one breathless moment, Zariah thought she saw something raw and unguarded in his eyes. Then his hand cupped her face with unexpected gentleness, his thumb brushing her cheek as every camera phone in the room angled toward them. She's under my protection. Anyone who threatens her threatens me. Are we clear? The ballroom erupted in frenzied whispers. By morning, every news outlet in Seoul would be running the story. The untouchable Mafia boss. The mystery woman. The public declaration that looked for all the world like a man defending the woman he loved. Kenji retreated without another word, but his expression promised this wasn't over. And Zariah, heart-hammering, still felt the ghost of Pai Young's touch on her skin as he led her through the parting crowd. His hand never leaving hers, playing a role that felt dangerously close to something real. If you're seeing this, subscribe now and drop your location. Destiny brought you here, the next scene proves it. The hotel hallway stretched like a tunnel of polished chrome and soft lighting, empty except for the 2 of them and the 5 bodyguards stationed at careful intervals behind Pai Young like a human wall. Zariah's heels clicked against marble as she tried to put distance between herself and the ballroom, between the cameras and the whispers and the way Pai Young had touched her face like she mattered. Slow down. His voice stopped her mid-step. Not an order this time. Something else. I need air, she managed, not turning around. If she turned around, she'd have to face what had just happened. The way he'd defended her. The way the entire room had watched them like they were the only 2 people who existed. The threat is real. His footsteps were quieter than hers. Predatory. Kenji doesn't make moves like that unless he's planning something bigger. You're not safe alone. I'm in a hotel hallway surrounded by your people. You're in a hotel owned by one of Kenji's associates, surrounded by my people who might be his people, and you just became the most valuable piece on the board. He was closer now. She could feel the heat of him at her back. Turn around. She did, and immediately regretted it. This close, in the soft warm lighting of the hallway, Pai Young looked less like the cold mafia boss who'd tried to intimidate her with tattoos and more like a man barely keeping himself in check. His jaw was tight, his hands flexed at his sides like he didn't know what to do with them, and the tattoos creeping up his neck seemed to pulse with each controlled breath. "What Kenji did tonight was a declaration of war," he said, voice low. "He tried to destroy you to get to me. Which means he knows." "Knows what?" "That you matter." The words hung between them like a live wire. Behind them, down the hall, Zariah could see the 5 staff members in their beige uniforms and navy bows, standing in perfect formation, watching with the neutral expressions of people paid to see nothing and remember less. "I'm your assistant," Zariah said, but her voice sounded uncertain even to her own ears. "That's all. You were protecting your reputation, I was protecting you." He stepped closer, and she instinctively backed up until her shoulders hit the wall. He didn't touch her, but he didn't need to. His presence alone was overwhelming. "I don't protect people, Zariah. I use them. I calculate their value and I deploy them like chess pieces, and when they're no longer useful, I cut them loose." "Then why?" "Because when I saw that footage, when I saw Kenji trying to hurt you, I didn't think about strategy or optics or political advantage." His hand came up, hesitating an inch from her face, and she could see the intricate dragons and tigers writhing up his wrist, disappearing beneath his sleeve. "I thought about breaking every bone in his body until he apologized." Her breath caught. "That's not calculating," Pai Young continued, and something almost like wonder crossed his features. "That's not strategic. That's dangerous," Zariah whispered. "Yes." His hand finally made contact, fingers curving along her jaw with devastating gentleness. The same gesture from the ballroom, but here now, without the cameras, it meant something entirely different. "You showed up in a service elevator with a cleaning cart and a teddy bear backpack, and you should have been terrified. Should have run. Should have been like everyone else who looks at me and sees a monster wearing expensive suits." "I see the monster," she said quietly. "I also see the man who keeps the teddy bear on his desk, who reorganized security rotations because my instincts were right, who hasn't fired me even though I'm probably the worst personal security assistant in Seoul. You're the best one I've ever had." His other hand came up, framing her face now, his thumb brushing across her cheek as his eyes searched hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. "I've never liked anyone, Zariah. Never let anyone close enough to matter. Never felt." He stopped, jaw working, and she realized with shocking clarity that the most dangerous man in Seoul didn't have words for what was happening between them. So she found them for him. "At first sight," she breathed. "In an elevator. When I was covered in cleaning supplies and fear and you looked at me like I was the most confusing thing you'd ever encountered. You still are." His forehead dropped to rest against hers, and the gesture was so intimate, so unguarded, that Zariah felt something crack open in her chest. "You walked into my world with your terrible optimism and your ridiculous teddy bears, and you made me feel human. Terrified." He pulled back just enough to look at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, Pai Young's expression was completely unguarded. Vulnerable. Real. "Because if you matter, you can be used against me. If you matter, you're in danger. If you matter." "I'm already in danger," Zariah cut in, her hands coming up to rest against his chest, feeling his heart hammering beneath the expensive fabric and the tattoos and all his carefully constructed armor. "Kenji made sure of that tonight. So maybe stop trying to protect me from you and start letting me choose to stay." For a long, breathless moment, they stood frozen in the hotel hallway, her in her borrowed white lace dress with the whimsical teddy bear backpack still somehow strapped to her shoulders, him in his sharp black suit with death written on his skin and something like hope struggling to life in his eyes. The staff members watched with their trained neutrality, bearing witness to the moment a mafia boss fell in love with a woman who saved his grandfather with a cleaning cart. Then Pai Young closed the distance between them completely, pulling her into an embrace that felt less like protection and more like surrender, his face buried in her hair as he held her like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to something good. "You're going to destroy me," he murmured against her temple. "Or save you," Zariah whispered back. "Or both." And in the sleek modern hallway of a hotel owned by enemies, surrounded by witnesses and danger and a world that would try to tear them apart. Neither of them let go. Before I show you the craziest part, hit that subscribe button and tell me where you're watching from. This is about to get wild. Zariah wasn't supposed to be at the warehouse. She was supposed to be at the office, reviewing security protocols and pretending the hallway embraced 3 nights ago hadn't fundamentally altered the gravity between her and Pai Young. But then she'd noticed the discrepancy in the shipment manifests, containers that didn't match their listed contents, timestamps that overlapped impossibly, and her instincts had screamed loud enough that she'd followed the paper trail to the docks before thinking it through. The warehouse loomed against the night sky like a sleeping beast, all corrugated metal and shadows. She'd parked 2 blocks away, telling herself she'd just observe, just confirm her suspicions, just. The gunshot shattered the air before she reached the entrance. Zariah froze, every survival instinct suddenly online and screaming. She should run. Call Pai Young. Call someone. But her feet carried her forward instead, toward the small side door that maintenance workers used, the one that would be unlocked if this facility followed the same safety violations as every other warehouse she'd cleaned in her former life. It was. The interior was a cavern of shipping containers stacked like building blocks, harsh fluorescent lights casting knife-edge shadows across concrete floors. Voices echoed from somewhere deep inside, angry, sharp, speaking in rapid Korean and something else she didn't recognize. Then Pai Young's voice cut through the chaos, cold and absolute. You had one job. Deliver what was promised. Instead, you bring me counterfeit documents and think I won't notice. Zariah crept closer, using the containers as cover, her heart hammering so loud she was certain someone would hear it. Through a gap between 2 steel boxes, she could see them. Pai Young, flanked by 4 of his men, facing off against a group of 6 others. The strangers wore expensive suits but carried themselves wrong. Too tense, too ready, hands hovering near concealed weapons. The documents are authentic, the leader said, but his eyes betrayed him. Your grandfather approved this arrangement. My grandfather has been dead for 2 weeks. The words hit Zariah like a physical blow. Dead. But she'd just seen him last month, healthy, drinking tea, laughing at one of her terrible jokes about office plants. The stranger's face went pale. We weren't informed. Because it's not public knowledge yet. Pai Young's voice dropped to something sub-zero. Which means you just confirmed you're working with whoever tried to kill him. The same people who've been feeding you insider information. The same people who think I'm too distracted by my new assistant to notice a coup. Everything happened at once. The stranger reached for his gun. Pai Young moved faster, a fluid motion that ended with a blade. Where had he gotten a blade? Opening the man's throat. Blood sprayed across concrete as the other men drew weapons, as Pai Young's bodyguards returned fire, as the warehouse erupted into chaos and violence and death. Zariah couldn't breathe, couldn't move, could only watch as Pai Young became something else entirely. Not the man who'd held her in a hallway, not the boss who kept her teddy bear on his desk, but the monster everyone whispered about. He moved through the fight like a dancer, like death itself, every motion precise and economical and absolutely lethal. 3 bodies hit the ground before she could process what was happening. Then one of the strangers broke away from the fight, running blind, and ran straight into Zariah's hiding spot. They collided hard. The man grabbed her arm, gun swinging toward her face, and she heard herself scream. Pai Young appeared from nowhere. There was no hesitation, no moment of calculation. Just Pai Young's hand closing around the man's wrist with enough force to snap bone, the gun clattering away, and then the same blade from before opening the man's throat with surgical precision. The body dropped. Pai Young stood over it, chest heaving, covered in blood that wasn't his, the tattoos on his neck seeming to writhe in the harsh light. His eyes found Zariah's, and she saw the exact moment he realized she'd witnessed everything. No, he breathed. No, you can't be here, you weren't supposed to. You killed him. Her voice sounded distant, disconnected. You just, without even thinking. He was going to kill you. Pai Young stepped toward her, and she flinched. The movement stopped him like she'd slapped him. Zariah, he had a gun to your head. You slit his throat like it was nothing. Like you've done it 1,000 times before. She was shaking now, the adrenaline catching up, making her legs weak. "How many people have you killed?" The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of sirens. Pai Young's men were already moving, dragging bodies, cleaning evidence with the practiced efficiency of people who'd done this before. "I don't keep count anymore," Pai Young said finally, and the honesty in his voice was somehow worse than a lie would have been. "This is what I am, Zariah. This is what I tried to tell you in that hallway. I'm not the man who keeps teddy bears on his desk. That's the mask. This," he gestured to the carnage around them, to the blood on his hands, to the bodies being loaded into containers that would disappear into the ocean. "This is the truth." Zariah's back hit a shipping container as her knees gave out. Pai Young moved to catch her, then stopped himself, like he didn't have the right to touch her anymore. "Your grandfather," she whispered. "You said, dead. Poisoned 2 weeks ago. We've been keeping it quiet to draw out the traitors." His jaw was tight, every word costing him. These men were part of it. They thought with grandfather gone and me distracted, they could move product through our ports without oversight. They were wrong. You used me as bait to make them think you were distracted. No. He dropped to his knees in front of her, close but not touching, and the anguish in his face looked real. Felt real. You were never bait. You were supposed to be safe in the office. I never wanted you to see this side of me. Never wanted you to know that you're exactly what everyone says you are. Tears were streaming down her face now, hot and bitter. A killer. A monster. Someone who takes lives like it's just business. Yes. The word was raw. I'm all of those things. But I'm also the man who would burn this entire city down to keep you safe. I just proved it. One of his men called out a warning. Police were 3 minutes away. They needed to move. Pai Young stood, offering his hand to Zariah. Blood stained his cuffs, his rings, the tattoos that marked him as exactly what he was. She stared at that hand for a long moment, understanding that taking it meant accepting all of him. The teddy bears and the murders. The gentle touches and the brutal efficiency. The man who made her feel seen and the monster who just killed 5 people without hesitation. "We have to go," he said quietly. "Right now, Zariah. Please." She took his hand. "Wait up, you're really getting to the thrilling part. Subscribe and comment where you're watching from as we proceed." Elena Kim had always been good at finding secrets. It was why the syndicate had kept her employed for 15 years despite her complete lack of loyalty to anything except her own advancement. Information was currency and she was very, very rich. The proxy marriage certificate had been buried deep. 3 shell companies, 2 defunct law firms, and a grandfather who'd been paranoid enough to encrypt the bride's identity even in legal documents. But Elena was patient, and the right amount of money in the right hands could decrypt anything. When the name finally appeared on her screen at 2 a.m. in her pristine apartment overlooking Gangnam, she laughed out loud. Zariah Noel. The cleaner. The girl with the teddy bear backpack who'd somehow weaseled her way into Pai Young's inner circle and was now playing assistant like she belonged there. That Zariah Noel. Elena pulled up the contract details with shaking fingers, hardly daring to believe her luck. Married to Pai Young 3 years ago as part of grandfather's estate consolidation. Legal binding clause that made her a co-beneficiary of the entire Eastern Territory holdings. Divorce required mutual consent or, she scrolled further, heart racing, death of one party, which would automatically transfer all assets to surviving spouse. But there was a poison pill buried in the legalese, the kind of thing grandfather would have insisted on. If the wife died under suspicious circumstances within 5 years of grandfather's death, all assets would be frozen and transferred to a neutral trust, effectively crippling the syndicate's operations for years. Clever old bastard, Elena murmured, already calculating. Grandfather had been poisoned 2 weeks ago, which meant the protection clause was active, which meant Zariah's death would destroy Pai Young's inheritance, his territory, his power base, which meant Zariah was the most valuable target in Seoul. Elena reached for her phone, scrolling through contacts until she found the one she needed. Kenji answered on the second ring, voice sharp with suspicion. This better be important. The assistant, Elena said without preamble. The one Pai Young's been parading around. I know what she is. Silence. Then, I'm listening. She's his proxy wife. Has been for 3 years. Neither of them knew until recently. Grandfather set it up in secret. But here's the interesting part. Elena pulled up the legal clause, reading it aloud with relish. If she dies suspiciously while grandfather's estate is still in probate, Pai Young loses everything. The Eastern Territories, the port operations, the offshore accounts. All of it frozen for minimum 5 years. She could practically hear Kenji's mind working through the implications. You're certain? I have the original contract. Signed, sealed, filed with the International Registry. It's ironclad. Elena stood, pacing to her window. Below, Seoul glittered like scattered diamonds. Kill the girl, and Pai Young becomes a king without a kingdom. He'd have to rebuild from nothing while every rival in the region moves on his territory. He'd never let us get close to her now. Not after the warehouse. So Kenji knew about the warehouse. Interesting. Elena filed that information away for later use. He's bringing her to the anniversary gala next week, Elena said. The one at the Grand Lotus Hotel. Public event, international guests, too many witnesses for him to go full monster. It's the perfect opportunity. Security will be. I have the security rotations. I have the floor plans. I have the access codes for the penthouse suites. Elena smiled at her reflection in the window. I have everything we need. The question is, are you willing to risk it? Because once we move on her, there's no going back. Pai Young will know it was us. He already knows we're coming for him eventually, Kenji said, and there was something dark and satisfied in his voice. Might as well make sure he falls hard when we push. The girl dies at the gala. Make it look like a kidnapping gone wrong. International incident, outside actors, nothing that traces back to us. And if Pai Young gets in the way, then we remind him that monsters bleed just like everyone else. Kenji paused. Send me everything you have. Contract, security plans, her schedule. I want to know every move she makes between now and the gala. Already compiling it. Elena's fingers flew across her keyboard. Though I have to say, it seems almost wasteful. She's nobody. A cleaner playing dress-up. Killing her should feel bigger somehow. It will be, Kenji promised. Because we're not just killing her. We're killing the first thing Pai Young has ever loved. That's worth more than all the territories combined. Elena ended the call and returned to her screens, pulling up surveillance footage from the hotel hallway 3 nights ago. She'd seen the embrace, the way Pai Young had held Zaraya like she was the only thing tethering him to humanity. Had watched him transform from the cold Mafia boss into something almost human. It would be fascinating to watch that humanity die with her. She began drafting the operational plan, humming softly to herself. The gala was in 6 days. 6 days to finalize every detail, to ensure every exit was covered, to make certain that when Zaraya Noel walked into that hotel, she would never walk out. On her screen, frozen in a moment of captured intimacy, Pai Young's hand cradled Zaraya's face with devastating gentleness. Elena zoomed in on the image, studying the vulnerability in his expression. Enjoy it while it lasts, she whispered to the man on the screen. Love makes you weak, and weakness gets you killed. She hit send on the encrypted file, watching it disappear into the digital void toward Kenji's secure server. Somewhere across the city, the machinery of betrayal began to turn, gears clicking into place with mechanical precision. The Mafia boss had finally found something worth protecting, which made it the perfect thing to destroy. The gala had been beautiful right up until the moment Elena's gun pressed into Zaraya's ribs in the women's bathroom. Cold metal a sharp contrast to the warm silk of her dress. Don't scream, Elena whispered, her smile perfectly intact for the benefit of the security camera. Don't fight. Just walk with me to the service elevator like we're old friends, and maybe you'll live long enough to say goodbye. Zaraya's training kicked in. The training Pai Young had drilled into her over the past months. Assess threats. Calculate exits. Buy time. But her body betrayed her with trembling hands and a heart that hammered too loud. Pai Young will know. Pai Young is occupied with the Japanese delegation. By the time he realizes you're gone, you'll already be leverage. Elena's grip tightened. Move. The service elevator rose in terrible silence, floor numbers ticking upward like a countdown. When the doors opened on the penthouse level, Kenji was waiting, flanked by two men Zaraya didn't recognize. His smile was all teeth. The mystery wife herself. I have to admit, when Elena told me, I didn't believe it. A cleaner. Grandfather married Pai Young to a cleaner. He circled her like a shark. But I suppose the old man always did have a sense of humor. They forced her up the final stairwell to the roof access, where Seoul spread below them in a glittering carpet of lights. The hotel's rooftop garden was empty, abandoned for the gala below, and the wind whipped Zaraya's hair across her face as they dragged her toward the edge. Here's what's going to happen, Kenji said conversationally, pulling out his phone. We're going to call Pai Young. We're going to tell him exactly where you are. And then we're going to watch him choose between saving you and saving his empire. He'll come for me, Zaraya said, forcing her voice steady. Oh, I'm counting on it. Kenji's smile widened. But he can't save you and stop the hostile takeover happening in the ballroom right now. The board is voting on emergency succession as we speak. By the time he reaches this roof, he'll be deposed and you'll be dead. Elena finished. A tragic accident. Distraught woman, new to high society, couldn't handle the pressure. Threw herself from the roof. Except I won't cooperate. Zaraya's mind raced, cataloging details with the instincts honed from years of being invisible in buildings like this. The roof access door. The ventilation units humming near the north corner. The maintenance platform she'd spotted on the way up. You'll have to throw me yourself, and Pai Young will know it wasn't suicide. We'll drug you first, Elena said pleasantly. Stop stalling. But stalling was exactly what Zaraya needed to do. Every second was another second for Pai Young to notice her absence, to check his security feeds, to realize something was wrong. You know what's funny? Zaraya said, backing slowly toward the ventilation units. I used to clean buildings like this. 5 years, dozens of hotels. You learn things when you're invisible. Like how every luxury hotel has the same safety violations. Kenji's eyes narrowed. What are you? Zaraya lunged sideways, grabbing the maintenance access panel on the nearest ventilation unit. It swung open, because of course it did, because maintenance crews were always too rushed to lock them properly, revealing the dark mouth of an exhaust shaft. Like unsecured roof vents that connect to the penthouse level, she finished, and dove inside. The shaft was narrow, claustrophobic, and absolutely filthy. Zaraya's dress tore as she scrambled through the darkness, her cleaner's memory painting a map of the ductwork. This shaft led down to the mechanical room, which connected to the service corridors, which meant if she could just reach the junction point. Gunshots rang out above her, bullets pinging off metal. Someone, Elena probably, was shooting blindly into the shaft. Get her. Kenji's voice echoed distorted through the vent. She can't have gone far. But Zaraya was already sliding downward, using gravity and desperation to propel herself through the twisting metal tunnel. Her hands found purchase on rivets and seams, her body remembering the countless times she'd navigated maintenance spaces that weren't meant for human passage. The shaft branched. Left led to the mechanical room, safety, but obvious. Right led to the penthouse suites, dangerous, but unexpected. Zaraya went right. She emerged into darkness behind a decorative grate, her dress ruined, her arms bleeding from a dozen small cuts. Through the grate, she could see an empty penthouse suite, absurdly luxurious, completely unguarded. Her phone was gone. Elena had taken it in the bathroom. But there was a hotel phone on the nightstand, and if she could just... The suite door burst open. Kenji stood in the doorway, gun drawn, breathing hard from running down 8 flights of stairs. Behind him, Elena and the 2 guards spread out to block any exit. Clever, Kenji said almost admiringly. But you're trapped now. No vents. No exits. Just you and us and gravity. He advanced slowly, and Zaraya pressed herself against the wall, searching desperately for any advantage, any weapon, any. The window behind her exploded inward in a shower of glass. Pai Young swung through on a rappelling line, moving with the fluid precision of someone who'd breached buildings 100 times before. His suit was torn, his face bleeding from a cut above his eye, and his expression was absolutely murderous. "You touched her," he said quietly, and it was worse than shouting. "You put your hands on what's mine." The tattoos on his neck seemed to writhe in the suite's dim lighting as he dropped the rappelling line and pulled a knife from somewhere inside his jacket. Not a gun. A knife. Because he wanted this personal. Kenji raised his weapon, but Pai Young was already moving, closing the distance within human speed. The knife flashed once, twice, and one of the guards dropped, clutching his throat. "Zaraya," Pai Young said without taking his eyes off Kenji. "The bathroom." "No. Lock the door and don't come out until I tell you it's safe." But Zaraya couldn't move. Could only watch as the man she loved transformed fully into the monster she'd witnessed at the warehouse, as he carved through Kenji's remaining guard with brutal efficiency. Elena raised her gun toward Pai Young's back. Zaraya didn't think. Just grabbed the heavy crystal lamp from the nightstand and threw it with every ounce of strength she had. It hit Elena square in the temple. The woman dropped like a puppet with cut strings. The suite went silent except for heavy breathing. Kenji stood alone now, gun trained on Pai Young, but his hand shook. "You can't win this," Kenji said. "The board voted. You're done." "The board voted on false information," Pai Young replied, advancing slowly. "Information that will be corrected the moment I walk back into that ballroom with my wife at my side. The legal, legitimate wife that grandfather chose. The one whose death you just attempted, which conveniently violates about 15 international laws and 3 syndicate codes. She's a cleaner. She's mine." Pai Young's voice dropped to something sub-zero. "And you just made the last mistake of your life." What happened next was fast and brutal and absolutely final. When it was over, Kenji's body lay on the expensive carpet, and Pai Young stood over it, breathing hard, knife dripping. Then he turned to Zaraya, and the monster receded, leaving only the man who'd held her in a hallway and confessed to being terrified. "Are you hurt?" His hands hovered over her, cataloging injuries without touching, like he'd forgotten he had the right. Did he? "I'm okay." Her voice shook. "I used the vents. Like you taught me. Assess, calculate, by time." Something that might have been pride flickered across his face. Then he pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, his face buried in her hair. "I thought I lost you," he whispered. "I thought I was too late." "You weren't." Zaraya clung to him, to his warmth and solidity and the rapid hammer of his heart. "You came. Always," he promised. "For you, always." Outside, sirens wailed. Inside, surrounded by bodies and broken glass and the wreckage of a failed coup, the Mafia boss and the cleaner held each other like the world was ending. Or maybe like it was just beginning. Subscribe real quick, tell me where you're watching from, and get ready, because the next 5 seconds will shock you. Do it. The ballroom had gone silent by the time they descended from the penthouse. Pai Young's hand wrapped protectively around Zaraya's as they stepped through the gilded doors. Her dress was torn and stained, his suit covered in blood that wasn't his, and together they looked like survivors of a war no one else had been invited to. Every head turned. Every conversation died. The emergency board meeting froze mid-vote. Papers scattered across the table where Kenji's allies had been orchestrating their coup. The Japanese delegation stood frozen with champagne glasses halfway to their lips. Even the string quartet stopped playing, the last note hanging in the air like a held breath. Pai Young surveyed the room with the cold precision of a general assessing a battlefield, then guided Zaraya to the center of the floor, positioning her beneath the massive crystal chandelier that cast fractured light across her face. "Kenji is dead," he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom with absolute authority. "Elena Kim is in custody. Their conspiracy dies with them. The vote is void." One of the board members, an older man with white hair and expensive cufflinks, cleared his throat nervously. "President Pai, the succession protocols state that without proper—" "I have proper everything." Pai Young pulled a folded document from his jacket, blood-stained but intact. including the proxy marriage certificate that grandfather executed 3 years ago. The one that makes this woman, he turned to Zariah, and something softened in his expression, my legal wife and co-beneficiary of the entire estate. The ballroom erupted in whispers. Zariah stared at him, then at the document he held. She'd almost forgotten about the mysterious letters, the redacted names, the ghost husband she'd never met. In the chaos of kidnapping and violence and survival, the impossible coincidence had been buried under more immediate concerns. The names, she whispered. We never actually read. I know. Pai Young's thumb traced over her knuckles, an intimate gesture in front of hundreds of witnesses. Grandfather knew exactly what he was doing, binding us together before we ever met, making sure that when the time came, I'd have someone by my side who couldn't be bought or corrupted or turned, or someone who'd save him in an elevator with a cleaning cart, Zariah added, and despite everything, the blood, the bodies, the attempted murder, she felt a hysterical laugh bubble up in her chest. That too. His smile was slight but genuine, the kind of expression his face wasn't built for. The marriage is legal and binding. Has been for 3 years. Which means every decision I've made, every territory I've claimed, every deal I've signed. You've been my partner in all of it, whether you knew it or not. I don't know how to be a Mafia wife, Zariah said, loud enough for the room to hear. I don't know the politics or the protocols or how to navigate this world without getting people killed. You navigated a ventilation shaft while being hunted, Pai Young countered. You threw a lamp at a woman with a gun. You saved my grandfather and challenged my authority and kept a teddy bear on my desk despite every intimidation tactic I could deploy. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent a fresh wave of whispers through the crowd. You're already everything a queen needs to be. He turned back to the assembly, still holding her hand, presenting her to the syndicate like a declaration of war and peace simultaneously. This is Zariah Pai Young, he announced, using a surname she'd never claimed but somehow fit perfectly. My wife. My partner. The woman who will stand beside me as we rebuild what the traitors tried to destroy. Anyone who challenges her challenges me. Anyone who threatens her signs their own death warrant. Are we clear? The board members exchanged glances. The Japanese delegation nodded almost imperceptibly. One by one, the assembled crowd began to bow, some reluctantly, some with genuine respect, but all acknowledging the new power structure. Zariah squeezed Pai Young's hand, feeling the weight of 100 stares, 1,000 expectations, a world she'd stumbled into by accident and was now bound to by law and something far more dangerous. I never got to say yes, she murmured, just for him. Say it now. She turned to face him fully, ignoring everyone else, focusing only on the man who defended her, saved her, chosen her above territory and power and everything he'd built. Yes, Zariah said clearly. To the marriage. To this life. To you. Pai Young's expression transformed into something raw and unguarded, and for a moment they were back in that hotel hallway, wrapped in each other and possibility. Then he kissed her deep and claiming, in front of the entire syndicate, sealing their union with the kind of public declaration that couldn't be undone or denied. When they broke apart, his forehead rested against hers, his voice dropping to a whisper only she could hear. Welcome to the Empire, Mrs. Pai. Try not to reorganize it too much in the first week. No promises, Zariah whispered back and felt him smile against her skin. The orchestra resumed playing, conversations restarted with nervous energy, and the world kept turning. But beneath the chandelier, in the center of the ballroom, the Mafia boss and his cleaner queen stood together, rewriting the rules of a world that had tried to destroy them both. Across the room, near the service entrance where staff members pretended not to watch, Zariah's old cleaning cart sat abandoned, teddy bear keychain still dangling from the handle. A reminder of where she'd started, and how far she'd fallen, or risen, into a life she never could have imagined. Pai Young followed her gaze, then looked back at her with something that might have been amusement. Should we keep it? As a memento? Absolutely. Zariah smiled, fierce and certain. Every queen needs to remember where she came from. And where she's going. The question hung between them, weighted with meaning. Outside, sirens still wailed. Upstairs, bodies were being removed. In boardrooms and back alleys across Seoul, rivals were already plotting their next moves. The danger wasn't over. It might never be over. But Zariah looked at the man beside her, tattooed, blood-stained, utterly lethal, and somehow impossibly hers, and felt something settle in her chest that might have been certainty. "Wherever we go," she said, "we go together." Pai Young's grip on her hand tightened, a silent promise, and they turned to face the empire they would now rule side by side. The syndicate waited. The enemies circled. The future loomed uncertain and dangerous and absolutely inevitable. But in a service elevator 3 months ago, a cleaner with a teddy bear backpack had saved an old man's life and set in motion a chain of events that would reshape the criminal underworld. And somewhere in the space between light and shadow, between violence and tenderness, between the monster he was and the man he was becoming, a mafia boss learned that love wasn't weakness. It was the most dangerous weapon of all. The chandelier above them swayed slightly in the ventilation breeze, casting prismatic light across the newly crowned queen and her killer king, and in the shadows beyond the ballroom doors, someone raised a phone and took a photograph that would be on every news outlet by morning. The Korean mafia boss and his unexpected queen, a love story written in blood and teddy bears. But the real story, the one about proxy marriages and cleaning carts and the thin line between salvation and destruction, that story was just beginning. And neither of them had any idea how much darker and brighter it would get. Thanks for watching. If you think this was intense, Part 2 will be darker, deeper, and even more dangerous.